Maseches Nazir Daf Gimel continues working through the Mishnah, the first Mishnah, and there were a number of cases there which we discussed were yodos. They were abbreviated ways, or perhaps even kinuyim, ways of expressing the vow of Nazirus. The Mishnah wants to explain each one how you know that he's referring to a Nazir and how you know that he's accepting upon himself Nazirus. You have to establish all these things. Now, as we've seen, a reference to hair can often be interpreted as referring to Nazirus, but it has to make sense. So the first case is where he says, Hareini kazeh, I am like this. Now in our last case, we said that he said that because whatever he said, we know he's referring to Nazirus or to hair because he was holding his hair. But here, if he says, I am like this, and he's holding his hair, that's meaningless. What do you mean, I am hair? That doesn't make any sense, and that doesn't mean Nazirus. So Shmuel says, no, that's not talking about where he's holding his hair, that's talking about where there was a Nazir passing by, and he's saying, I am like this, meaning I am like the Nazir. The next expression was where he says, Hareini misalsel. Misalsel, the Mishnah is seeming to translate as curls, referring to curls of hair. So the Gemara asks, how do you know that silsel means curls of hair? Maybe silsel has a different meaning. So the Gemara says that there was an incident where a maidservant in the house of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who was very well versed in Hebrew, and we find Chazal learn the meanings of many words from the servants in Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's house. So she said to someone, how long are you going to be curling your hair? So you see that the term misalsel means curls, and therefore it refers to hair. So if he says hareini misalsel, it means to say I'm going to have curls, meaning I'm going to have long hair, meaning I'm going to be a Nazir. So the Gemara says, well, maybe it means something else. We find that the Torah uses the word salsala to refer to Torah itself. It says salsala usarai Mecca, if you curl in it, meaning if you work hard in it, it will lift you up. So maybe he means to say, I'm going to learn a lot. So the Gemara says that Shmuel explains that he's holding his hair, and therefore you know he's referring to hair. He's not just referring to Torah itself. The next phrase, it says Hareini mechalkel, which means to say the Gemara understands that is again referring to hair. So the Gemara says, how do you know that kilkul, how do you know that mechalkel refers to hair? So the Gemara says there is a Mishnah which says sid, which is something which is used to remove hair. How much sid can you transport on Shabbos? Do you have to transport on Shabbos through Rosh Hashanah in order to violate the Isser of carrying? So it says kidei losud kilkul, enough to apply to remove hair. So you see, kilkul is a term that refers to hair. So, and over there, Rav says how much, which hair? Beis tzidah, the hair of the temples of the head. So Gemara says, okay, that's one potential meaning, but maybe it means something else. Maybe he means I'm going to feed the poor people, like mechalka, like it says vaychalkel Yosef es aviv es achiv. It says that Yosef fed his father and his brothers. Maybe it's referring to that. So Gemara says that Shmuel explains here again he's holding his hair, and therefore you know that he's referring to here. All right, next phrase the Mishnah said where he says Harei alai lishalach pera. The Gemara translates that as I am going to remove hair, or I will grow hair. So the Gemara explains which one is it and what does it mean. So the Gemara first assumes that shiluach means growth. So the Gemara says, how do you know that shiluach means growth? So the Gemara quotes a pasuk. It says shlachayich pardes rimonim. You grow a orchard of pomegranates. So the Gemara says, well, maybe it means remove, like it says he will send water on the fields, but that means he's going to remove it from Shemayim. So the Gemara says, no, we know that it means to grow because we have the word para appears in two places, and we learn a hekesh between the two. It says Kadosh Gadel para, referring to a long growth of hair of the Nazir, and it says Ufera lo yishalechu by a Kohen hedyet. So there it says yishalechu, it uses the term shalach as referring to growing long hair, and therefore that's linked to the term para here, and therefore clearly means hair growth, and that's what he's referring to. The Gemara's second answer is yes. When it says sholech mayim, the pasuk that you brought, you're saying that it means remove it from the sky. It does mean remove it from the sky, but it's also referring to growth, and therefore it could be referring to when the person says the word shalach here, it could be referring to that pasuk and still be referring to the growth which is brought about by that word. Either way, his intent is to express growth of hair, which is a vow of Nazirus. Okay. Okay, next we saw the Mishnah said that if he says Harei alai tziporin, I am obligating myself a carbon of 2 birds. So that was a machlokes. Rabbi Meir says it is a vow of Nazirus, and the Chacham say it's not. So Gemara wants to know what's pshat in this machlokes. So first of all, let's explain Rabbi Meir's opinion. Why does he say that it is a vow of Nazirus? Gemara brings 2 explanations. Machlokes Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. What does Harei alai tziporin, what is I'm obligating myself birds, why does that refer to Nazirus? So Reish Lakish says, because there's a pasuk that refers to growth of hair and nails near birds. It's talking about birds. It's actually describing Nebuchadnezzar when he became wild. And the pasuk says, Bei shatam milsu safas al Nebuchadnezzar, umin anasha terid ve'isba kitoirin, he was separated from humans and he was wild like an ox in the field. So it says that his hair grew like nishrin, like eagles, and his nails grew like birds. He had claws like a bird. So this is what he's referring to when he says birds. He's referring to this bird growth. He's referring to this growth of hair. And it says in this pasuk here. And the machlokes, Reish Lakish explains this as follows. Rabbi Meir says when somebody says words, he probably means words that are in the pasuk near that word. According to the Chachamim, that can't be what it means. And so you cannot assume that someone says birds, he means, the pasuk about Nebuchadnezzar, referring to what's near there, that it's talking about hair growth. That's not logical. It's a bit far-fetched. That's what the Chachamim hold. Now, that is all Reish Lakish's pshat. Rabbi Yochanan says that's not what it means. That's not Rabbi. That's not what this machlokes is, and that's not what Rabbi Meir's opinion is. We just assume that when he says birds, he means the carbon of a Nazir who is tameh. If you have a Nazir tameh, he has to bring 2 birds. A regular Nazirus has to bring 3 karbanas, a chatas, an asham, and an ola, but those are all animals. A Nazir who becomes tameh has to bring 3 karbanas. By him, the ola and the chatas are birds. So maybe that's what he's referring to. So Gemara says maybe that's what he's referring to. You can't make a vow of Nazirus based on a maybe. You have to be clear that that's what he means. And if he meant to say birds, okay, maybe he's referring to those words. Or maybe he just means to say, I want to bring 2 birds, 2 karbanas. I didn't know it has anything to do with Nazirus. No. If he just meant to say, I want to give a nedava, vow of 2 birds, then he should say, Cain, Harei alai Cain, I promise a nest of birds. That is the usual expression that's used. So he says, well, maybe he doesn't mean, so fine, maybe he doesn't mean a carbon nedava, but he at least means maybe a carbon of a mitzvah. A mitzvah also has to bring birds. Maybe he wants to bring that. So Gemara says, okay, there was a Nazir passing by. So Gemara says, maybe the person passing by was a Nazir tameh, and he means to say, I want to take over your karbanas. I'll give you the birds to use for your carbon Nazirus. Maybe that's what he's vowing to do. So Gemara says, no, the person passing by was a Nazir tahar, and therefore he's just referring to Nazirus, so he's not giving that person his birds, because that person's not chayav any birds. Okay, so we have here machlokes of Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Now the Gemara says, what's the practical difference between the two? Whether when the person says birds, according to Rabbi Meir, it means birds from the pasuk, or when he says birds, he's referring to the karbanas. So Gemara says the difference is if he uses a slightly more complex phrase. If he says birds which are close to hair in the pasuk is on me. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, even though he says that, we don't do anything based on those words. You can't say that a person is referring to the words in the pasuk that are nearby, and therefore this has to be nothing unless you happen to have a Nazir passing by. Now, according to Reish Lakish, that would clearly be a case where we would say even Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim would agree that that's what he means, and we would establish Nazirus based on that. Okay, now the Gemara asks, is there really such an opinion that holds that a person cannot learn, you cannot refer to things using words near it in the psukim? But if somebody says Yamin, he says my right hand, that's always a Lashon Shvua. We know that. That's in Gemara elsewhere. So Yamin is, how is that a Lashon Shvua? That's learned from a pasuk where it says Yamin near Shua. It says V'yarei Yamino Usmolo el hashamayim vayishava b'chai ha'olam. So the answer is it's not because it's near it in the pasuk. It's because Yamin, the word right hand, that is a key word for Shua. That's a classic key phrase for Shua. And they have a brayso that says, how do you know if someone says right hand, that's Lashon Shua, like it says Nishba Hashem b'yamino. And if somebody says left hand, it's also Lashon Shua, like it says Uvizroya uzay. All right, now we get to our next Mishnah, brief Mishnah here, which begins which discusses if someone accepts part of a Nazirus upon himself, that the entire Nazirus is chal on him. So if he says, I'm a Nazir from grape seeds, or he says from grape skin, or he says from haircuts, or he says I'm a Nazir, or he says I'm a Nazir from Tumah, even though he only accepted upon himself part of a Nazirus, that is a full Nazirus, and he has to have all the halachos of Nazirus upon himself. Now the Gemara says that this Mishnah, it seems to be one side of a machlokes. Tanaim, we have a brisa where Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon says that you're not creating the vow of Nazirus until you make a vow on all the things. You have to spell out, if you start spelling things out, you have to spell out the entire list, otherwise it's not valid. The Rabbanan say, no, even if you only mention one thing, it's a complete Nazirus. Where does Rav Shimon get his halacha? You have to spell everything out. So from the pasuk itself, it says, if somebody starts spelling things out, then he has to say everything from Chatzanim to Zag. He has to spell out every single thing on the list. And if he doesn't do that, then it's not Nazirus. The Rabbanan say, no, there's a different pasuk. It says, Miyayin v'sheichar yazir. Someone says he wants to vow from wine, and sheichar, the Rishonim explain, is old wine. Even though he just says that is still a full fledged vow. Now, the Gemara wants to know, what does Rav Shimon do with that pasuk? The Gemara explains that's extra. That's even if he makes a neder to aser the wine of a mitzvah. Nazir is always aser on the wine of mitzvahs. The Gemara is going to try to figure out which wine of mitzvah you're referring to, and we'll leave that for the next daf.